5-year-old and a 7-month-old, 8.
Are we ready or?
My youngest is 10.
This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Well, we'd like to welcome everybody out to the Wednesday, January 4th Planning Commission meeting for Herriman City. We appreciate your attendance at this time. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order, and we will be led by Julie Smith for our Pledge of Allegiance to begin.
Please repeat the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. We do have a full quorum today. We'll move on to item 3.3 for any conflicts of interest on any of the items tonight.
Mr. Chairman, I have one with item 4.1, Salt Lake Community College. That is a project belonging to my company, so I would feel appropriate for me to recuse myself and step down.
That is duly noted and appreciated as well. So we will recognize that and honor that request as well. So thank you for that. We'll move on to any other conflicts of interest. We'll move on to item 3.4, which is approval of the minutes for December.
I have a technical question.
Yeah.
Is there a reason our screens aren't on?
Well, there is nothing on our screens, but don't have a presentation going yet.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
While they're solving that technical problem,
Yeah.
I did look at our planning commission policies.
Okay.
And this conflict of interest has not happened very often, and I apologize that I didn't remember this, but it does say that whoever has a declared conflict of interest should actually leave the room.
Okay.
Policies do state that.
To leave the room, not even, okay.
Leave the room.
To leave the room, take a bathroom break, do what you need to, so.
I'll stand out there and you can give me a high sign when they're done.
Right, very good. All right. Okay, no, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. We can continue, though, while we wait for the monitors to come up. Nope.
So I'll make a motion for item 3.4 to approve the minutes for December 1st.
Okay, we have a motion by Heather. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Forrest. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. We're still waiting. Did they just turn them all off? Maybe they did. Oh, yeah, they were. Where's the power? There it is, power button. That's funny. Yep. Yeah.
Oh,
Everybody find your power button?
Hey.
How funny is that? Just like that. Now, new year, new beginnings here. So, all right. We'll go ahead and move on to item 4.1, which is a consideration of conditional use permit for Salt Lake Community College, and we'll go ahead and excuse Daryl at this time. And I believe Clint, are you presenting this one? Yes. Item 4.1.
So this screen is not on either, but that's...
Push the button.
I'm not sure where the button is. That's okay. So this is a request from the Salt Lake Community College Institute. It is a conditional use. We were just well versed in that, so we'll go through this presentation here.
He's also an IT specialist. Look at that.
Okay. Isn't that most of IT? So the property in question is kind of located down further south in the city, just a little bit further north of the Real Stadium campus and that. This is a closer look at where the site takes place. It's in that yellow outlined area there. The subdivision that's on the screen now is for the community college. There is, along with this subdivision, there is an internal ring road. So access to the site would come off of Real Vista Drive, and would then go to the ring road, and then from the ring road, you would access into the institute site. So the proposals before you here, the architecture of the building is very modern. It matches mostly what the Salt Lake Community College campus is going to be in terms of material and appearance. It's very different in terms of what you typically see from an institute building, but it does match the architecture on site. They're providing 121 stalls, and they're exceeding the landscaping requirement as well. They have provided a rendering showing where the rooftop units would be and showing that they're concealed by the parapet wall on top of the structure. So this is just the general site plan showing the layout of the property, where the building is located. You can see pedestrian access on really all four sides of the building. They'll have pedestrian access along the main road, and then on the north side. So in terms of where this sits with the campus, on the north side or on the top side of what we're seeing here, that would be where Salt Lake Community College has their main parking area. And then there's a major thoroughfare for pedestrians, which is just on the upside of this, just to the north of the building there. Anyways, very good pedestrian connections throughout, parking islands. The parking situation does meet current ordinance as well. So, and then this is their landscape plan, and we'll discuss this a little bit further. There are a couple of concerns from staff on the landscape plan that we'll address in the presentation. So as we just learned, conditional use considerations, we have to look at detrimental effects. In terms of incompatible design, the only thing that we could find is the landscape plan. There are some, and most of the, when we say incompatible design, it's mostly just referring to some of the detail that we need to see in the landscape plan. There's a section called M1, which is kind of this, well, it's around the parking lot. It's a certain texture that they're showing, but they're not showing that it meets the 50% live growth criteria. So we are recommending as a condition of approval to show that M1 area does comply with the 50% live growth standard, and that will be reviewed by staff as that correction comes back to the city. They are also in the middle of the parking section there. There's two parking islands that do not have trees in them currently, as proposed anyways. These two parking islands have street light or have parking lights in them. And so they're requesting a waiver of strict compliance from the commission to not have to locate trees in those islands. For our staff's perspective, is we are recommending denial of the request. So the findings required to approve or to provide a waiver. So they're found here. So it preserves the purpose of the landscaping chapter. It doesn't result in an adverse effect. Strict compliance is unreasonable and unnecessary, and physical conditions of the property restrict compliance. So reviewing those as staff, we didn't feel that any of those met the criteria for a waiver. The Planning Commission may certainly find differently, but those are the considerations in terms of providing a landscape waiver for those trees in the landscape islands. That being said, we do recommend approval with the conditions here on the screen that I think that we've touched on all of those. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer what I can.
Great, thanks.
The
Clint.
applicant is also here, and they'd be glad to answer questions as well.
Any questions for Clint before we allow the applicant to come up?
I have one. On the landscaping side, does the landscaping that they've proposed meet the campus standards?
That would be between the campus site and yeah. So the larger campus area is controlled by Salt Lake Community College, which is a government entity. So staff.
That's why I ask.
Yeah. So the city, we don't really have what do you call it, jurisdiction over that.
Correct.
Because this is a conditional use, it's not a state-owned entity. We do have jurisdiction on that, on the community college.
So will we be creating an ugly duckling if it doesn't match the rest of the campus, is kind of my thought. Will we
I
Will we
don't
look
think
different
so.
Will we look different than the rest of the campus because of what we're requiring?
So I haven't seen the landscaping plans for the surrounding areas, just based on the positioning of the property though. So let's see, let me go back to this. In terms of how this fits in with the campus, this is the community college is, so it's pushed up all the way against the street, which we support and recommend for all buildings. So on the north side of the building is just a large parking area. And then the campus building is kind of located further to the west. So this, I mean, the site is kind of separated from the rest of the building by this parking area and the large pedestrian connections through there. I don't see you know, if there was a higher standard on the institute area versus the remainder of the site, I don't see that as an issue or a problem. So, but I have not seen the community college landscaping plan, so
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if perhaps they had designed to a campus standard so that it would fit in with campus, and then we were requiring something different so that it would look different than the whole rest of the campus. So that's why I was asking.
yeah.
Do you know if there'll be permit parking?
Sorry?
If it'll be permit, like if they'll have to have a permit to park there?
I'm not sure how they'll control parking. I just know that their parking meets our current standards. My assumption is that they have more than enough parking. Like I said before, they have an enormous parking lot to the north side. I imagine some of those students will just park in that parking lot all day long, go to the
Do you
campus.
feel like the
and then,
school has enough parking, or is that not really a concern either?
and that's something that we can't review, just based off of the state entity portion of that.
Well, it's state property all the way around this.
I just wondered if
so
there's like not enough parking at the school, if they would come and park here and take up spots.
Guess we can ask the applicant too about how they're going to manage their parking at their site as well. Any other questions for Clint?
Question, did the applicant give a reason for the request for the waiver?
They did, and they can address that maybe better than I can, but the general consensus was that because there's the lighting poles in those two islands, they find it difficult to put both the lighting poles and the trees in the same. Any other
Okay.
questions? Okay.
Thank you, Clint. Go ahead and invite the applicant to come forward. Go ahead and state your name for us as well. You probably heard the discussion. Maybe go ahead and answer some of those questions as well, but present anything else that you would like that may not have been covered. Might be good for us to hear.
Okay, my name is Mike Davey with BHD Architects, representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So first on what's on the screen, the parking islands. The reason we're requesting a waiver is because we have two pole lights in those two islands, one pole light in each island. And so we don't block the light, we just prefer not to put trees in those islands. We've put shrubs in those islands, and we've put, multiple trees in the other islands. So I think overall, we're required to have, 12 trees in all the islands in total, and we're providing 14 trees just because we've doubled up trees in some of the other islands. So it's all about just providing light in the parking lot without, being obstructed by the trees.
Okay. The question about, is it going to be permitted parking coming in here, or
Yes.
do you know? So it'll be by permit only?
They will regulate that by permits, yes.
Okay.
And, we do have more than what we need.
Yeah.
We're not scraping by the minimum by any means. And from what you understand, the college has adequate parking as well. They're doing this in phases, and there's a lot more parking planned for the future phases as well.
Okay. Great. Any questions for the applicant?
I guess with the lighting, I assume it's for safety as well?
Yeah, we have lighting all around the parking lot. Because this building is going to be used during evening hours for evening classes, we wanted to illuminate the entire parking lot.
Very good point.
And then on the M1, which is the rock mulch areas being landscaped, if we could just work with staff on that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
Just making sure we meet their ordinance, but there's some technical reasons why we're doing what we're doing and trying to kind of match the campus, but if we can just work through staff with that, that would be good.
No, that's a great point, too. The question was brought up by Jackson, whether or not is this unique to your portion of the development, or is it incompatible, compatible also with the rest of the community college coming in as well?
And we're trying to be compatible, but we're not matching the campus. You know,
Okay.
we're not trying to match their landscaping, because theirs is different than ours. We are trying to be compatible with, so we don't clash with their landscaping.
Great, but still meet the requirements for the city as well.
That's right.
Very
Yep.
good, very good. Great. Any other comments or questions for the applicant?
So I guess, is that just two lights for the whole parking, or?
No,
where's
there's
all the
lights,
lighting?
if you look, there was, from their lighting plan, correct me if I'm wrong, they were all around.
Yes.
The
only
perimeter
ones
as
that are
well.
inside the parking lot are just in those two islands, but we do have parking lot lights around the entire perimeter of the parking lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just found the page that I needed.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay,
We
thank
appreciate
you.
your time. All right. Any other comments or discussion by the Planning Commission on this item?
Was there a lighting plan that came with?
There was a lighting plan there. I did look at the lighting plan.
I think it's page 23
Yeah, okay.
of our packet.
Yeah, it's in the packet. I do a concur. The comment that was made, and maybe Clint can help us with this too, is, you know, the tree amount, was it specifically the trees were not, the number themselves was not being met requirement, or was it specifically for those two islands as well?
All right, so the city ordinances, and they can plant excessive trees, that's fine with us, right?
Right.
But city ordinance requires for every parking island, 1 tree and 2 shrubs.
Gotcha.
And
That's
that's the dispersal of shade and cover and stuff like that.
What is stat, like, what did they normally recommend for lighting like that with trees next to it?
What would we recommend for,
Because we see their point where,
Yeah.
you know, the lighting would be impacted by trees in the island as well.
I mean, I know that they can both exist in the same area, you know, maybe a shorter light pole and a higher tree canopy, something along those lines. Yeah, we've seen some shorter light poles that would
Or-
probably provide adequate lighting for that
Or
middle
vice versa,
section.
shorter tree. and-
It's pretty common to have both in the same island.
Okay.
Typically, your lighting is 12, 15 feet taller than your tree canopy anyways, and so it's just spraying the light out over the entire space.
Yeah, and you would get some light coming in from the perimeter that would be lighting.
Right, 'cause you
area
got-
that would
you
be
got
shaded by the trees as well.
Lights all the way around the perimeter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the length of those islands too, they could put a light pole at one end and a tree at the other.
So you only need 1 tree in each of those islands. Like the others, there's 2 in each, but yeah, okay.
It's true.
Correct.
You could put a light on the outer ends and then your trees on the inner ends, and then you got.
And I don't know if
or
the
inverse.
staff's, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say too, seems like there's excessive, or in excess of parking that is required, maybe even take a stall or 2 to make the islands maybe a little bigger, provide some additional landscaping that way too, so.
Yeah, and by no means are we saying that they've done a poor job landscaping. Their landscaping plan is,
Yeah, it looks
you know,
really
it's a
nice.
very,
Yeah.
we
Agreed,
find it to be a very well laid out
agreed,
design and everything, but
agreed. Okay, any other comments or questions, discussions? Can we go to the slide with the recommendations then? Maybe.
Let's see, I'll make a motion for approval of item 4.1 with the recommendations as noted by staff.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Jackson and a second by Heather. We'll go ahead and call for a vote. Brody?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
And Andrea?
Yes.
All right, thank you. That motion passes. Do we need to, I guess maybe real quick on that motion, we didn't clarify on item 2C. Plant trees is required in all parking lot areas or receive approval. We didn't clarify what that motion was now that we've gone through that vote.
You're
We
right.
probably should have.
Said or.
We should probably update that motion and do a revote.
update it.
So if we could go back.
We go back to that.
Yeah, Daryl, just a
Daryl
minute.
has to
We're
go
going to
back
redo the motion. You can just stand right there for a minute. We've got the motion and we got the votes. We just want to.
Plug your ears.
Sorry about that. So if we can go back to that slide, just so that we can,
You're right.
yeah, I just noticed that. We want to clarify that for you, Wendy, right? You want that noted? So Jackson, if you want to amend your, or I guess we'll redo the motion and vote. So go ahead and,
So I make a motion for recommendation of item 4.1 with all items as noted by staff.
item 2C,
And item 2C is receive approval, or no?
the first part, right?
Yeah.
Plant trees is,
Yeah, plant trees is required in all parking lot islands, correct?
okay. With the first part of item 2C. You still second that,
Yep, I'll
Heather?
second that.
Okay. We'll go ahead and revote for that one. Brody?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
And Andrea? Yes. All right, thank you. Daryl, welcome back. Good catch. Yeah. All right, thank you for that. It's a new year, we're learning. All right, Clint, sorry, real quick, before we jump into item 5.1, Clint, this is up for public hearing as well as 5.2, so I'll go ahead and read the public comment policy and procedure for public hearings and public comments. The purpose of public comment is to allow citizens to address items on the agenda. Citizens requesting to address the commission will be asked to complete a written comment form and present it to the Deputy City Director. In general, I will allow an individual 3 minutes to address the commission. A spokesperson recognized as representing a group in attendance may be allowed up to 5 minutes, and this applies to all public hearings as well. Clint, thank you. 5.1.
So this is something we've seen numerous times, I should say, at this point. We've seen the MDAs, we've seen some rezones from this group as well. So this is just another another proposal from the Automall group. Is this a PDF or? Yeah, if you could. I can't advance a PDF, apparently. Thank you. Okay, so subject property, I think we're pretty familiar with this, is just north of 126th off of Mountain View Corridor. And there's this little remnant piece hanging out there that was previously owned by UDOT. The applicant has purchased the property and are now proposing to rezone the property from the A143 to the AMSD zone, which complies with both the MDA and the general plan. This is the, actually in the general plan, the property is not shown, probably because it was owned by UDOT at the time. But it would make sense that that area match the surrounding area of being rezoned to, or being a commercial use. Again, this is another map of the area just showing, this is in a document from the MDA. So as the MDA was approved, this area was shown to be zoned as AMSD. So in terms of the zoning compliance, we don't have any concerns with the request, and we do recommend approval of the rezone to the MSD zone. Any questions for me?
Yeah, seems pretty straightforward. Any thoughts, questions?
No.
Okay.
The applicant is here as well, if you have any questions for them.
Great. We'll go ahead and let you have a seat, Clint, and invite the applicant to come forward and provide any additional information that you might deem necessary for us.
Oh, at the time that we were zoning the property, we did not own the UDOT parcel, and so you're not allowed to zone property you don't own, and they weren't willing to sign the application. So that's why we're coming back at this time.
For the record, this is Julie Smith.
Julie
Thank you
Smith
again.
with Saratoga 262.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'll go ahead at this time and open up the public hearing for this item. I don't see any public here, but did we receive any online comments or any comments ahead of time? None. All right. I will go ahead and close the public hearing then at this time. And any discussion, any thoughts or a motion or a recommendation? This is again a legislative item, so this will go to City Council for final approval. So this is a recommendation to Herriman City Council.
I'll make a motion.
I was just going to say it makes sense having it
Yeah,
in the same zone.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead, Heather.
Is everyone okay with me making a motion?
Go for it.
I'll make a motion to approve item 5.1. Sorry, let me rescind that. I will make a motion to recommend to the City Council item 5.1.
Approval of item.
Approval of item 5.1.
Great.
I'll second that.
First of the year.
All right, we have a motion by Heather and a second by Brody, and we'll go ahead and call for a vote. Andrea?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
And Brody?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to item 5.2. I believe Todd has this one, correct?
All right, thank you for having me. So what's in front of you is a proposed text amendment that will go to the City Council, and you will make a recommendation of approval or denial to the City Council. This text amendment is regarding residential treatment facilities. And I first want to go quickly through the federal laws that apply, and then I'll go into the specifics of the text amendment briefly. So cities can enact zoning laws that restrict or allow various uses depending on the location, in other words, the zone that they're located in, and the type of use that's located there. Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination, among other things, based on a person's disability. Notwithstanding, the United States Supreme Court has recognized that group living presents urban problems, such as more cars rather continuously pass by, more cars parked, noise, travel with crowds. And the United States Supreme Court specifically stated that cities have a legitimate interest in creating guidelines and land use projects to protect a quiet place where yards are wide, people few, and motor vehicles restricted. There's a fine balance in creating a regulation regarding group living arrangements and discriminating against the disabled. And in going through this process, we feel like we've created that balance. So generally speaking, you'll see that the text amendment repeals Chapter 25 and Title 10, which is where the current regulations lie. We're moving it out of the land use section and creating its own title. There's a couple of reasons for doing this. One, residential treatment facilities have a zoning aspect, and we're leaving that zoning aspect in there. In other words, you look at the use table, and you'll see that there's going to be some changes there. But there's also a business licensing aspect to it. So by creating its new table, we can reference the zoning regulations, we can reference the business licensing, but the bulk of treatment facilities is the reasonable accommodation process, and that lays it out in that new title. That's not necessarily a land use issue, and that's why we're taking it out of the land use title. The revised regulations, we made the changes to be compliant with federal and state laws. We added, removed, and updated definitions. We increased the number of permitted unrelated disabled persons from 4 to 8, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We clarify the process to obtain a business license, and we update the process for a business or individual to request a reasonable accommodation, which will be decided by a hearing officer who has experience and knowledge of applicable laws. So going into a couple of the specifics, not all of them, is that the first thing is we are going to require a business license. Right now, it's not real clear if a business license is required. We are modifying the reasonable accommodation process. So although it's going to be an informal process, not the specific standards that we would normally present to court, it does have a lot of those aspects, such as you have to develop the argument. You have to cite to federal laws that support your argument. If you are adding or providing any evidence, you have to do so beforehand. So that way, when the city is responding to it, we know exactly what they're asking for. So written application with specific information, they need to pay an application fee. Their briefing requirements, in other words, they need to submit their material. The city has an opportunity to respond with whether or not they met their burden. And there's an outline as far as how the hearing is going to be handled and what the hearing officer's role is. And then it details the decision and what it needs to include and a deadline. In the current code, the Planning Commission decides reasonable accommodations. We are proposing that that we have a hearing officer who has an experience as a hearing officer and has knowledge of the Federal Housing Act, the American with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, and other applicable anti-discrimination laws. So the benefits are the main one, to avoid public clamor. Hearing officers have quasi-judicial immunity. Res judicata meaning that they can't keep bringing a suit or a request after a hearing officer has made a decision. And the hearing officer that we would hire would have specific knowledge relating to these laws and the efficiency. Hearing officers that I've used have done several of these before. I don't need to do a lot of education, and I don't need to worry about whether or not the hearing officer has the qualifications or how to work through these kind of very nuanced issues. So the applicant needs to comply with all state and local laws. The applicant will need to comply with any state licensures. So when an operator asks for a reasonable accommodation, they have regulatory licenses that they need to get also from the state. If they have issues with their state licensure, then that would give us an opportunity to relook at their license from the city level. We would require a half-mile distance between all group living arrangements. And the reason for that is that we don't want to burden any one particular street with multiple group living arrangements, which can be a problem with increased traffic and parking. The applicant can always request a deviation from that, and we could look at it more specifically if that request is made. About moving the amount of unrelated persons from currently 4 to 8, if state regulations allow for it. So state regulations has square footage requirements for if the home is big, typically you can fit more people in there. So they would still need to meet those state requirements. They wouldn't be able to rent a one-bedroom apartment and fit 8 people in under there, pursuant to state laws. But we would, on the city side, permit up to 8 without a reasonable accommodation. And this is because dozens of studies show that recovery is needed in group settings. Those studies state that group size should be between 5 and 12. The rationale is that people seeking treatment recover better, faster, and without relapse when there's a support system. And 8 is kind of that sweet spot in my experience. And lastly, any application that facility will need to maintain residential characteristic. And I've had this be an issue where an assisted living facility wanted to put, I think, over 150 rooms, and there would be multiple people in those rooms. And it was essentially a building that it was a beautiful building, but it wasn't a residential building. So would be another requirement that we would, that's in this proposed text amendment. And if there's any questions, I would be happy to entertain them.
How are we, I feel like we need to further define residential on that last statement. What do we stand behind? I know we lost visual, but.
Well, and as you know, especially with our legislative body up on the Hill, they prohibit residential design for single-family homes. So we wouldn't really be looking at any design standards, but it's just, does this look like a home versus does this look like a building? And I guess we could go into a definition of what that means, but
that's my only worry. Because there's modern houses, there's different types of homes,
and we would
some look like office buildings, even though they're homes. That's that seems a little vague to me.
Yeah. More often than not, they are going to have issues with the other requirements, such as number of people that live in a home.
Yeah.
But as far as design, that's that's going to be a difficult one, even if we do define it. Other than the extreme cases like the one that I had. But
So do we,
I just wonder
do
how
we keep that
defend
then, you know, as a prerequisite if it's very hard to define? Seems like adding it as a prerequisite kind of shoots ourselves in the foot before we even start.
I like it because I know kind of what's intended, the intent of it, but I don't know how we say that is or is not residential and characteristic.
Well, we have residential characteristics for our, you know, residential neighborhoods and things too, right? There's.
I think that's
it
what we
still
need to
should
further
be-
define, maybe.
But, well, doesn't
But
current
then you run
code
into the
already
problem with
define
the
that?
state saying that you can't define that anymore, so.
But we do have standards, I guess, for our residential neighborhoods and things like that, so they just need to be following those
There are
standards
a
as well,
few basic
right?
standards
Yeah.
still. I mean, there's a minimum size that
Yeah.
was reduced. You require parking, off-street parking. Characteristics are, we're still gonna maintain setbacks and building height. Maybe not architectural characteristics, but we still have scale and
Can we, I guess, add those? So we're more specific.
yeah. In your motion, if you want to, we can reference those provisions in the zoning code. I think that'd be a good.
We say the residential characteristics
As defined.
in Title 10.
Yeah,
That's fine, Title 10.
I think that's
Yes,
good.
one more, and I'm not sure how this works with law, but could we require, and this wouldn't cover all homes within the city, but requires that it meets residential characteristics of the HOA? It's in an HOA?
Typically, cities don't get involved in what the HOA requires. We're just looking at city code.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
So I had a question. Back in 2017, there was a request from an existing treatment facility that wanted to increase the number of beds. And I think they wanted up to 10. And the Planning Commission denied their request. And so there was like a closed session. And I think we found that it would change the character of the neighborhood. Is that something that is still, we could still, I don't know how I want to ask this, that we could still enforce? Or I'm just wondering about that, because it was like it was kind of a big deal. And so
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about that situation and existing facilities and new facilities and how that might work out with the request to allow more.
Yeah, it's hard to opine on that type of situation when I don't have really any knowledge on it. Typically, when you get requests above 10 or around 10 or more, then the main argument is whether or not the science behind group living supports that number, rather than changing the characteristics of the home. Parking can be an aspect of it, and traffic, but it depends on the type of facility that's being operated. For example, a youth treatment facility is going to have different parking and traffic as compared to a sober living home, and those are going to be all factors that we look at, and that's really what the federal law allows cities to look at and we don't need those standards inside our code because federal law
I just want to make
dictates.
sure we're not like whatever it was, because that's been a couple of years that was done. But I just want to make sure that what we're approving tonight isn't going to allow what we denied and what I think eventually happened back then. And I couldn't like get everything from that, but I'm just worried that if we do allow for 10 or 8 or whatever, that might be allowing that issue that occurred back then to occur.
But fortunately, it would not come before the planning commission. That would go to a public hearing officer, right? to
Instead
make
of
those
us this time.
determination.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just
as
wonder
well,
if we
but
have
yeah.
like the, if the, sorry, the code would be changed that then it would be allowed.
Then it would be allowed then
Yeah.
at that point, yeah. But if they were asking for 10, that's not allowed.
But if
We
8
are
would
only
still
allowed
be an
8.
issue too, because
Yeah.
aren't they allowed in neighborhood, like in residential, right? Okay.
Yeah, this is, if it's not residential, then the FHA doesn't apply.
Okay.
It doesn't apply to commercial zones. It doesn't apply where people don't live. So these are only going to be residential areas where this law applies.
Okay.
So even in that situation, it would be, you could have a new application today, and it might be a very different analysis depending on what evidence they present. And depending on what they present, my argument on the city side may, well, if it's 8, then it would be permitted under the current, but even if the text amendment doesn't go through, 4 is a very restrictive number, and I would be very surprised if it was limited to 4.
Okay, I'm just wondering if if this all passes as is and an existing facility came in, they could ask for up to 8?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what, so a reasonable accommodation is when you, as the planning commission, think of a variance, they are deviating from something in city code that prohibits them from doing it. Right now, they would ask for a deviation from the unrelated persons of 4 to whatever they want, 10, 12, 20, 30, I've had all of them. And we look at them and we make sure that the law supports the number that the city is either proposing as an alternative or the number that is in city code. 4 is an extremely difficult number because no case law studies support groups less than 5, really.
Do you feel like that's something that staff should look into a little bit more? Is that that facility, the existing facilities that we already have in that situation that we already had, or?
Not necessarily. I don't want to base a text amendment based on a facility that's currently either operating or that has been presented before.
Okay.
Because I don't
If it's
want to
already
get into
permitted,
issues.
it'll be grandfathered in regardless of what this is doing, right? It'll still be allowed and continue to operate, but it sounds like the situation that came before you was, they were looking for a variance to the city.
At that time, yeah. I
At that
think so,
time, which was
yeah.
only 4.
But
and-
now if
and
they
now-
were permitted to have more, I'm worried that issue that was already
Yeah.
existing will be there.
Yeah, but it could go up to 8
Yeah.
with this amendment. Yep.
I have a question. If they were to go above 8, could they do a different zone?
Yeah, current zoning. I have never seen a reasonable accommodation where they've asked for a deviation and also asked for a zone change. That's the purpose of a reasonable accommodation, is to keep the current zoning.
Okay.
I have a question. Could you define non-related as it relates to this text? In other words, could it be cousins? Could it be, because then that could obviously expand that number to above 8.
I can't remember the specific provision in city code. If it's not in there, then we would just look at other guidance, which like we talked about in the work session, that's a very difficult thing to define right now. And the courts seem to be very lenient on what that definition includes.
So they could have more than, if they were related, you'd have related plus 8 non-related.
Right.
However many related, and then 8 additional non-related.
When you think of, I don't know if in my last presentation when we just briefly talked about treatment facilities, the Duggars, they have
Yeah.
20 plus people living in a home,
Yeah.
and there's no restriction on that.
Yeah.
So are there legal abilities for the city to look at how many unrelated people are there? Sure. That's why there's student housing that's permitted and versus student housing that's not permitted because of the amount of unrelated people.
The definition of a family in current city code has essentially two parts. First one is any number of people living together in a dwelling unit who are related by blood, marriage, adoption, or other legal relationship. Or, this is part B, 1 to 4 unrelated people living together in a dwelling unit. And we have that, we maintain that just as a benchmark, as a way of communicating what we define as a single family or a family. I don't know of any city that doesn't have that, and yet, based on court, experiences of cities trying to enforce that in court, it has been difficult to enforce. So we always end up enforcing secondary impacts, but it still is good to have at least
Some definition. Yeah.
And again, this is something that you have been spent a lot of time researching, and you brought your expertise to the city. And you balance here is trying to find how do we do something that regulatory framework that we're already obligated to do, right?
Yeah.
Protects the city's interests, and also creates that clear very comfortable with the work that our city attorney. This is a very challenging issue when it comes to.
And we did have outside counsel review this to make sure that we're not going awry in any of the issues, and he feels very comfortable with what we're proposing.
Very easy for a city to find themselves in are exposed to challenge because
So this does provide more, obviously more, yeah.
This really helps me.
Strength, yeah, yeah. Well, it helps us too. We don't have to hear it coming for us too, so, yeah.
Todd, my other question is, so with the half-mile distance, say they had one facility and they wanted to add on to that, would they not be able to, like, purchase a property adjacent and build a bigger, like, wing or something, or?
Under the proposed text amendment, no.
Okay.
However, they can always ask for an accommodation on why the city should, or the hearing officer should allow a deviation to that. Being on the same street is going to be challenging.
Okay.
Typically, the half-mile distance would be waived or considered that it's not really applicable when they're on separate streets, but still within the half-mile.
Great. Any other questions for the city slash applicant?
My thought for bullet point 5 would just be the facility must maintain, let's see, the facility must maintain or comply, or sorry, I wrote 2 different words. The facility must comply with residential characteristics as defined in section 10 of the city code.
Yeah, and we need to, this is still up for public hearing. We got to do a public hearing on this, and so if we're done with any more questions, we can do a public hearing and then move forward with any further discussion. So with that, thank you, Todd. Appreciate your time on this. As mentioned, this is up for a public hearing, so I'll go ahead and open the public hearing with no public in attendance. Is there any comments, though? This was noticed. No comments have received online either then. All right. We will go ahead then and close the public hearing at this time and go ahead and any further discussions, or go ahead and make a motion.
It should be Title 10, not Section 10.
Title 10? All right.
Brody?
I'd like to make a motion and recommend approval of the amendments with additional modification to bullet point 5 to state the facility must comply with residential characteristics as defined in Title 10 of City Code.
Okay, we have a motion by Brody and second by Forrest. We'll go ahead and call for a vote at this time. Brody?
Yes.
Forrest?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
Daryl?
Yes.
And Andrea?
Yes.
All right, that recommendation passes unanimously. All right, thank you. Is there any, item 6, any comments from the commission at this time? Seeing none, just announce the future meetings, so city council, so for just, this is nice. We have all the meetings on Wednesday, so every Wednesday there's meetings that are happening. So next, yeah, it makes it easy to announce.
Especially when we have that 5th week
Yeah.
meeting. No more back-to-back.
No more back-to-backs. Although we liked the other back-to-back because we had the next day, we were done in 4 minutes, I think was the record. So next week is city council. The following will be planning commission, and then the following week will be city council. So with that, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Heather. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.